Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of the Professional Care Workers Week and our first session this morning on registration of care workers, specifically in England. This morning with me, I have Professor Rayner, OBE from National Care Forum, Karen Hedge from Scottish Care, Anna Severwright from Social Care Future, and Palvi Dodhia from Serene Care. Thank you very much, lovely speakers, for joining us this morning. We started having a bit of a conversation before we started going live already. So it sounded to me like you're all ready to go to discuss all of this. If it's okay with you, we'll just get straight to it. And I think, the main question of it all, it would be great to have your opinion on whether you think we should have a compulsory, not a voluntary, a compulsory register for care workers, and whether it should include PAs as well. And Vic, if I could start with you, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Great to be part of this discussion. It's something that feels like we've been having a discussion about for many years in different shapes and forms, and certainly some of the early anticipated thoughts of green papers and so on. Registration has always been a hot topic as part of that. I think from my point of view, I do think we should have a compulsory register. I think there are many things, particularly during COVID, that became very apparent, that not having a full kind of listing of those who work in care meant that our ability to communicate directly with people, to quantify the numbers of people involved in the sector, to be really clear about the levels and roles and connect with people was a real problem. I think from many of the things I hear from employers are about delays and delays in terms of recruitment, that actually having some sort of compulsory register that enabled swift and straightforward transfer of key documentation between employers, gave them a level of safeguarding attached to it, was recognised by the regulator as an approved form of evidence of somebody's ability and safety to practice, would be really important, and something that was able to effectively demonstrate the level of training and expertise that someone had, so we didn't duplicate huge amounts of training effort when people move between organizations, would be really valuable. So from an employer point of view, I think there's some value around that. I think from the workforce point of view, I think there are all those things which are hugely helpful. And for those who I know work in other regulated professions, social work, nurses and others, there's also a sort of personal accountability and level of professionalism that I think being part of a register should imbue. Now, all of these things are very, very dependent on what level of investment goes into the development of a register, and therefore how valuable it is. And I think it has to be valuable for all employers, whether they're employing people themselves or through an organisation. And I think it has to have an inherent value for the person who's on that register. We could make a really, really rubbish register, or we could make something that utilises the technology, utilises the ambition of creating a really professional workforce that people feel valued and part of. If we don't do the latter, then we will all be wasting our time, and the criticisms that often are thrown at the notion of a register would be right.
And what about personal assistants? Do you think they should be included?
I think it, from my point of view, I think it needs to be relevant for everybody and every employer. So people who are there as personal assistants, I think I can see more clearly an advantage for them as individuals to be part of a cohort, particularly if you're working on your own for somebody. I think the opportunity to be part of a cohort of workers would be very important. We're not very good in this sector at having a coordinated body for workers. I think if you are somebody employing themselves, and I'm not speaking on behalf of people there, but I think there is a way of creating a register, just as I think there is a way of creating a training program that doesn't that should be able to meet the needs of people who are employing staff themselves. I think, you know, I'm not thinking about myself in that context. I'm thinking about sort of, you know, people I know who employ staff. I think if there was something that enabled a very quick ability to check who was actually safe to come and work with you. I was in an interview the other day with somebody who was employing people through social media and getting access to people. I think that's a great way to do it. I don't think that having a second layer of a register which shows that somebody has had some training and some qualifications ought to be a part of that. But let's talk about it.
Thank you very much, Vic. That nicely leads me to Anna to give her opinion as person, you know, Anna, you yourself employ PAs, you have for many years. It would be great to hear your view on register in general, but I think in particular on PAs.
Yeah, thanks, Karolina. Yeah, I do. I employ personal assistants, have done for over a decade now, which, where's that gone? So personally, I'm not particularly keen on having compulsory registration. I know that probably makes me an outlier here today, especially for PAs. And I suppose most of the people I know, and I don't know, obviously know everyone employs PAs, but quite a lot of us, I think we're quite scared of the idea, if I'm honest. And I think that's generally because the best PAs that I've ever employed have never ever worked in care before. So actually I've brought people into the sector, if anything, and and they've been fantastic because actually they've not come in thinking that they know about care and how to look after me. They've come in thinking that they've come to learn about me and to assist me in my life, I guess. And then and I've been able to, I suppose, teach them about me in my life, and some of them have gone on to other jobs, and some of them have gone on to stay as PAs for other people. So, and I think the other thing that really worries me about this is that, yes, I mean, Vic, you say we could set up a great register. We absolutely could. But I think history teaches us in social care that generally, you know, investment's not been there. And I suppose our experience of direct payments, you know, when they came in, they were there to create flexibility and give people choice and control. And what has happened over 25 years is bureaucracy and control has crept back in from everywhere, you know, because systems and organizations and people seem to love bureaucracy, and they seem to love. And so I suppose what worries me is that something could start off with all the kind of ideas of, you know, none of my PAs would have been on a register. And I suppose I also think my other point before we go on, because obviously we're going to talk about this, is I think we do conflate sometimes quality with kind of qualifications or even just being on a list. So I don't feel that automatically, because you're on a list, that actually means you have the right values and the right skills. You may well do, but equally you may well have those values and skills and not be on the list. And I suppose I don't know yet, and I'm really interested to hear about Scotland, because I think you know, I was in hospital in May, and a doctor came in, and I argued against with him, and he ignored what I said, did something to me, which was I was the wrong patient. Now, it was very minor. But, you know, he's on the register. Now, I use that as a pure example. It's a silly example. But what I'm trying to say, I think, is that we need to be saying, what's the point of this? And I get the idea of, I think maybe we could give support to care workers and a voice to care workers maybe in another way that doesn't cost them money and doesn't just become a tick box. I worry, I think that, you know, we'll just end up with this, people are on a list, and then we say, oh, that's good, they're on the list, that's okay. But are we actually investing in them? Are we actually, I don't want it to be a tick box that, you know, you've got this, you've got this, you've got this, off you go, you know. I suppose they're some of my concerns. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And I think, you know, it's a very important point. it shouldn't be a box ticking exercise. You're on the register, that's it, now we're done with you, you know, just pay your annual fee and carry on. I've been a champion of registration for many years now, and for me, main thing really about registration, aside from like the kind of being able to choose from a safer pool of people, let's say, where you already have some checks in place, is being able to give care workers development opportunities. Because when you look at the work that, you know, DHSC does in terms of investment, smaller or bigger, usually smaller for social care, into workforce, it is in a way, and we have to think, you know, what is easier sometimes for a policymaker to do, so they'd actually do it, to do it when you have registered workforce that you know where they are in the grand scheme of things, and what potentially they need, how you can put it in there. Because in terms of investment from the HSC to registered and non-registered professionals, there is a huge difference, because there's that issue of perception between, you know, your unregistered workers are not actually professionals, they're not necessarily perceived as such, and then you have your registered workforce as this very professional one. But I do get your point, you know, there are a lot of people that come into care that are not necessarily, they've never worked in care before, and they're absolutely brilliant. So for me, with the register as well, would be a matter of, we give people time to get on the register. It wouldn't be a prerequisite to start any job to already be on the register. It would be something to maybe work towards. Palvi.
So this is really interesting, actually. And as an employer, I have 2 care homes. I'm buying my 3rd one. And the way I think about it is a little bit different from the conversations you guys have already had. So as an employer, you know what's happened with the workforce crisis and everything. I don't need to go into that. I'm also the coach of the people plan. We've talked about it to death, all the crisis through COVID, mandating vaccines, Brexit, you name it, there's all these issues. As an employer, we spend a significant amount of our time recruiting and finding different ways to recruit. We're trying to tap the market. That's not just in social care, but go to colleges, try and find new people to bring into care. So it's not about just looking at a register or trying to find a pool that's out there, because we already feel the pool's quite limited from where it already was, let's say 3 years ago to now. What I thought, my thinking is, if a register comes out, is if someone is on this register, it will just speed up recruitment. I will not have to spend weeks and weeks and weeks doing background checks. Did they work there? The references I get are pathetic these days. I do not know if they're actually any good. I know that from February 12th to 19th of March, they worked there. How does that add any value? But CQC need me to get that box filled in on a letterhead. Now, those sort of things stop someone coming in. How in reality does that help anyone? Does that add any value? It just proves they worked in care. This register does the same thing, right? It proves that you actually worked at organization A. So that's taken away a bit of that bureaucracy. The other way I think about it is, people have to apply for a DBS right now, and that can take weeks and months, or weeks, lots of weeks to get, or days, who knows. But you can also have a DBS live, which within, you can go on a system and you can check. I don't stop myself hiring someone just because they've never had a DBS. And at the same time, I won't hire someone just because they've got a live one and they can start tomorrow. What it does do, it just means that, yes, it's a quicker process, but that's all I'm using it for, is a quicker process. The other thing is, it's also when people leave care. When people leave my organization and they leave without notice, they don't leave without completing their shifts, and they just don't turn up and they ghost. Why should they go back to another care organization and do that? They've literally left a care organization. And I feel that that should be flagged on a register. If you employ this person, they will not work a notice period. They will leave without notice, and that will cause safeguarding issues in your home. That is something that the next employer needs to know about. And I feel, because as an employer, I can't say that, because I will get sued if I say any of these things. I feel that there has to be a way where we can have the back of other care providers as well, because when I'm actually hiring people, I need to know that there's a track record. Their last employer doesn't, them working for 6 weeks in another care organization and their factual dates means nothing to me. However, had they been on a database where I can see, actually, their last 3 employers have said they quit without notice, and actually they only jump about and they do this much. That's interesting. How about the fact that they don't actually want to develop themselves? What's the reason for that? Why is it that they've come into a care home and they don't want to finish their mandatory training? How is it that they've been there for 2 years and it's taken them 9 months to do first aid training? How has that happened? I think for me, it's just to understand a bit more about the person. So I wouldn't use the register to go, that's the be all and end all. And I would never say, I think already we have to agree, we're really short of care staff in this industry. We can't just say, you're on this register and that's it. We're only going to hire you from this register. What I feel we should do is use it as an enticement thing and say, look, if you join social care, look at us. We have a developmental strategy for us. You've never thought of social care. You've thought about nursing, you've thought about other things, but how about social care? And look at all these things we can offer. And you don't need to stay with me for forever. You can actually move to organize, you can stay with me for a year or so, or 2, and then go on to the next organization, and we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. You don't need to keep doing all your training, because that's the biggest frustration that's come up time and time again within my own organization. And again, as the co-chair of the people plan group, it came up throughout. Everyone is sick of redoing the same training. It doesn't add value. If all you're doing is tick boxing, as Anna was saying, let's not tick box our way and say, yes, I've done this to qualification. Let's make it all have a purpose, and let's record it, so that actually if my employee went to your organization now, you can see that actually they've done all these things. Let's teach them something more. Let's develop that person further. And that's what I thought would be the real benefit of having a register.
Lovely, thank you. Karen, if I could go to you now, and first of all, if you wanted to share your opinion on registration in general, but also share with us, how does registration look in Scotland, whether you think it's working or not, what's the space for improvement, things that, if there was to be a register introduced in England, what are the lessons that we should learn really?
So in Scotland, we've had registration for 20 years now. Now, for people working in the care sector, that didn't really come until 2005, after they did a bit of co-production with people working in the sector around about what sort of qualifications would be required to be registered. So we do have a lot of history to draw upon and learning that has happened over that time. And we've seen a real shift in perhaps the role that the Scottish Social Services Council, the registration body, sort of undertakes and performs during that time. A lot of the conversation this morning so far has very much been about what is the purpose for each person involved, depending on where they sit in the system, including those with lived experience. And I think that's really what's important here. We don't want to have registration for the sake of registration. That's not going to bring any benefit at all. Equally, though, if it's only there to serve the system, i.e. in data collection, why would people register themselves if there's no benefit to them? So what we really need to do is look at this from a holistic viewpoint to really see how are we bringing advantage across the space. So in Scotland, we have over 165,000 people who are registered. And that's people who are delivering direct care and support, also includes early years in Scotland as well. And I think, during the pandemic, we spoke a lot about the invisibility of the care sector, and that certainly was experienced here in Scotland as well. However, it was far easier for us to be able to talk about the professionalism of the sector because they are professionally registered and regulated in that way. And it gave gravitas to our social care workers that perhaps doesn't exist in other parts in the UK and to the same respect. So I think, and actually just saying the word respect is probably really big in this, because it does offer that opportunity of saying, we should be respecting and valuing our social care staff because of the roles that they have to undertake in this. However, there are barriers to registration as well. So at the moment, it's usually the care worker themselves who pays for registration, and that's about £25 a year. And recently we undertook a survey with some care staff when over 97% of them told me they were experiencing financial hardship. At times like this, we cannot really expect that our social care staff should be paying for their registration, and actually really that should be funded by the government in that registration process. There was a trial last year to new registrants that there would be no fee. And actually, it didn't seem to have any impact on people coming into the sector. But I would really, really wish to see that trial run again, but on retention, because we're seeing so many people leave the sector that actually, if the registration is coming up for renewal, that might just be the final nail in the coffin, and they just think, stuff it. What's the point? So actually, if we can take that and remove that additional burden from them, and support them to feel valued in that space, and there's a lot of opportunity there too. It's an interesting time for registration in Scotland at the moment. The codes of practice, which are a series of sort of 6 codes that anyone working in social care has to fulfill. They are actually up for review. I think that closes at the end of October, maybe the middle of October. And that's just really to bring them up to date. They were last reviewed in 2016. So as you can imagine, some of the language is a bit different. We talk about service users in it. It talks about keeping people safe from harm. So it's just quite different language from maybe we would use nowadays. And we want to change that. But those 6 codes are really important and give that guide and that foundation. They apply to employers. So the first few pages in the codes of practice relate to employers and what they have to undertake. And the second part is about employees. And it's very much promoting the rights and interests of the individuals that you're working with, creating and maintaining confidence in them, promoting independence. Again, there's that bit about keeping people safe from harm. Upholding public trust is one of the codes. And lastly, interesting what you were saying, Palvi, accountability for the quality of your work sits in there as well. And I'm conscious I'm going on, but it might be worth coming back later to what sort of things are required to maintain registration. But I'm happy to pass over to others in the meantime.
No, I'm happy for you to carry on, Karen, if you just want to elaborate on that.
So I know some people who are listening in today might have experience through the NMC in the registration process. It's not dissimilar. There's a set qualifications that you must have to be registered, and they need to be maintained. And every year you have to submit what learning you've undertaken in that year to date. And sitting alongside that is some reflective practice as well on the impact that that's had on you, and how that's learned. Now, that has been really, really one of the most significant things of impact in the sector, because many people who work in social care, and actually we're seeing the demographic shifting, but certainly when we started working in this space, most people working in social care were age 50 plus. Often women who had dual caring responsibilities, and this was the first time in their life they've ever been asked, how does that make you feel? So unpicking what that means behind that, actually, how as a regulatory body are we able to support people when they're in that situation, in that scenario where for the first time in their life they're actually thinking, oh, hold on a minute. I've spent so much time caring after other people and looking after other people in my life. Actually, what do I want? What do I feel? And how does that sit alongside my professional registration as well? So there's a lot of learning that the regulatory body has undertaken in that not only do they have that regulatory responsibility, but they also have a responsibility there for the workforce to support and guide people through that. And that has resulted in a series and a suite of learning materials. They're in the process of creating a training passport, but also a significant focus now in well-being and support as well. So trying to be a much bigger package than what they used to be. And I guess that starts to answer that question, what is the advantage of being registered? Because it didn't really exist in the early days when it was first set up. It was very much for the system, but we're seeing that shift and that change as time has progressed.
Thank you. And if I can come back to you, you expressed concerns about, barriers that a register may introduce to your ability to employ people that you think would be best to work with you and, support you. Can you see a different way, either a different form of register or maybe a professional body or any other way where we can ensure that care workers are better recognized and respected, and most of all, better supported, where you'd feel that doesn't create a barrier to you employing people you want to employ?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different issues really, aren't there? and it's trying to find, you know, there's definitely a need for support. There's need for better recognition and value of social care as a whole, and then within that the workforce in social care, because I think actually part of the reason that we don't value, or that society and, you know, doesn't see, I mean, I think it's very bad and wrong, I totally don't agree with this, but that traditionally it's seen as a low skilled, and it's not seen as a profession, as in like a skilled profession. You know, I think that's a real problem, and I think we need to talk about social care in a way that means that everybody in society values it as much as they do, say, the NHS, you know, and we need to talk about the amazing skills and the talents that people have who work in social care. And I think we also need to find a way to support the people that work in social care better. And I don't know if that's necessarily having a register, or if there might be another way, as in there could be I don't know if it would be a union, but, you know, an organisation that people could join. So I suppose there's lots of different things, and I've seen, you know, I used to work in a regulated profession, and I know somebody whose profession recently, you know, last 10 years has become regulated, and most people I know who are coming up to renew registration, you know, it's generally, in my experience, been a kind of negative thing for them. They've now, this is you know, probably potentially because it took a lot of time and a lot of effort, but people just ended up going around trying to, you know, get people to fill in things, and it all became very like, I've just got to get this stuff done so that I can get through this next stage. And I suppose I'd really prefer that we had something that felt more of a supportive role for people working in the sector than about being a kind of we're going to keep track of you and we're going to strike you off if you. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that, I suppose, is it trying to do two things at once? And I don't know if one register or one organisation can very successfully be that, but because actually if you are struggling, say personally as a care worker, are you going to be scared to go to that organisation and say, I need some support, thinking, oh, but they might say that, you know? So I don't know. I suppose as a personal employer, I sort of just think that maybe if there's a voluntary thing. So some of my PAs come to me and they don't really, especially at the moment, because we're in a recruitment crisis and I'm feeling that as well. People are quite often unsure. So I regularly say, well, let's just try it, work, you know, do a couple of shifts, see how you feel. There's no long-term commitment, you know, because I'm trying to sort of hope that once they start, they'll stay with me for years, which some of my PAs have done over time. And I actually think if I said to them, you know, that's great, but in the next 6 months, you have to sort of make sure you get registered, because, you know, actually some of them would freak out because they're not particularly people that have naturally found, you know, filling in forms and writing stuff necessarily that easy in the past, and actually might feel a bit like, oh, this is more than I can cope with, and I'll just go back to my other job, which was, you know, and that worries me a bit. And I suppose for me also, there's a heck of a lot of paperwork that comes into this, and I didn't choose to become an employer. I mean, I did, because otherwise, you know, I wouldn't have the life that I have, but I just do not want any more paperwork. I just don't. I can't. I can barely do what I'm doing now. And yeah, so I suppose there's just a lot of questions for me. And I think even just paying the £25 at the moment, you know, that's a lot of money. And for me to pay as the employer, I probably would end up paying, because I'd feel bad asking my PAs to pay that. But I don't have spare money either at the minute. So it's a tricky one. Sorry.
No, thank you. No, some very important points there, Vic.
So I think I mean, those are exactly the right questions, Anna, or those are exactly the right challenges for any future registration process. And kind of all the things that I've heard, I don't think they're necessarily a reason not to do it. I just think those are the kind of barriers that make it workable. And I completely agree with what you said. Normally, what we create is something that's pretty crap rather than something that actually does the right thing for people. But this, as a way forward for challenging the workforce crisis, I think it has to be one of the tools. I mean, so I was really listening to what you were saying about kind of, bringing people new in. So it would be good to just maybe spend 5 minutes, Karolina, if we could, unpicking what that looks like in practice. So if somebody comes who's never worked in care before, and Karen, you would tell us what the Scottish situation is in this. So if I wanted to employ somebody as a carer who had never worked in care before as an individual or as an organisation, and they're not on the register, can I do that?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, you can. And there's a period of time, it pretty much as Anna suggested, there's a period of time within which, and I can't off the top of my head remember what it currently sits at, because it changed during the pandemic. I'm not sure if it's switched back.
Right.
Basically,
So it's
made it more
of
lenient
in
terms
or a
of
year or something like that. Possibly.
Yes.
So let's think about what would be a reasonable period of time.
And also it was staged as well. During the pandemic, during the crisis, it was, real basic stuff within the first 6 months, slightly more complicated by the end of the year, and then really shove the rest back until within 2 years in that role, to make sure that you have the space to do that and to be retained in the sector. So yes, there are timescales set around it, but it was very much about making it as easy to support people to work in the sector as possible.
Yeah. So there might be something about that, and then there might be something about, and I think that's another really important point, Anna, about that kind of support for registration process. So if this is an individual thing, and my understanding is that the Scottish body and Welsh and others, for workers, there is support in terms of completing the application and dealing with all of that. So a kind of really good wraparound support package that meant it didn't fall on the employer to do all the paperwork. There was a kind of clear sort of process around that. And maybe there's something about saying, actually, for a new register, in order not to put people off, their first registration is free. That sort of thing that might make it a more palatable. Because I think often when we talk about registration, it sounds like this kind of fixed, I can never say the word, is it behemoth? Whatever, that fixed thing that never can be changed, and actually is like a wall that people have to jump over before, and then when they're on one side of it, there's no kind of coming back. And I think it's, it has to work for people who've never worked in care before, because we need another 500,000 people. It can't be a sort of fixed thing that nobody new can come in, but maybe we don't talk enough about how new people come in, because I think that worry that you've brought forward, Anna, is one. The other thing that I think really underpins a lot of that, when I've heard it from a wide range of people, is that then what the requirements then are of registration, and whether they essentially suck the kind of life blood out of people who want to be in care. So at the end of the registration process, you're a kind of an automaton who only knows how to kind of deliver care in one particular way. I mean, there is a bit of me that always struggles with that, because that is so far away from how I see people delivering care in registered services. But I understand that is sometimes, that has either been people's experience of registered services, or that is something they have heard or experienced for themselves. So it's not to dismiss that, but there are lots of people in care who don't deliver care in that way, whether they've been trained in those things. But how do we get that training? This is a moment now where we could think about getting that training really right. So the top 10 things that are important for you, Anna, and for employers, in a sense, will be about, people's well, there'll be a range of different things, but right at the centre of them, that they'll be about understanding you or understanding the person they're delivering care for, and then everything else will span around that. And why do we think we can't create a training program that works in somebody's home as much as it works in a care home, which is also somebody's home, or it works in home care, which is also somebody's home? And I don't know where it's kind of gone wrong in some ways, but I kind of think that register, having that all exploded in a discussion about registration might be helpful, but it's not a panacea, I know. But so I'm apologize, I'll stop now.
No, thank you, Vic. I think I can definitely understand, Anna, where you're coming from, being worried that people will get scared. And whenever I think we'll talk about register, for me, it needs to be much more flexible than other registers that are available, starting from if somebody's already, one of the big issues would be getting the current workforce on the register without losing people and putting them off, that they have to register. And how do we actually allow to put on the register the skills that are maybe not necessarily their qualifications, but they've worked in care for 10 years. Yeah, and it's obviously somebody who's very experienced. You would expect that they have the right values, but how do you check it without putting a test in front of them? Because that may be the one thing that will scare them off and they'll run away. So having some sort of, verbal video submissions of just talking about your job, so what the right values are, how you talk about people, how you think about it, which obviously would be a very time-consuming and expensive thing to deliver. But for me, it would be a better approach than us having, you have to have NVQ level 2 and this, and this, because most NVQs level 2 in my experience, and I've done a lot of them in my care career, are just a matter of reading and paraphrasing the answers. It's not necessarily a good way of learning in the first place. And the second thing that I really think we need to reconsider is the expectation of your DBS check to be completely clear. Because, and I've spoken I think last year to a charity that works with women with criminal records, trying to get them into work. And why does it have to be completely clear? There are obvious things, that you wouldn't accept. There are some things that, if something happened, I don't know, 3-5 years ago, people, have different situations, different struggles in their life. Why does that automatically mean they cannot work in care? And I think even looking at the DBS situation again may potentially open up the sector to a lot of people who could come in and work with the right values. Because like I say, I don't really think just because your DBS check isn't clear, you don't have the right values to work in care. So, and I know that the whole DBS issue has been mentioned to me before by somebody on a panel a couple of years ago who was drawing on social care services, as an issue. I don't want to eliminate these people from a pool of people I'm potentially going to work with. So yes, it's there are potential barriers, there are things that we are worried about, but I think I personally agree with Vic that these are the ways, that important questions that hopefully we can work with, because I honestly struggle to see a way for a bigger investment from the government into social care and into the workforce, because at the moment the attitude is the lives of people who draw on social care aren't really valued enough. I think that's the starting point of a problem that we've got. So then people who support people who draw on social care services are not valued enough, and one follows the other. And if we start recognizing both, people like you, Anna, who draw on support, and people who provide that, and give them development opportunities, then hopefully that would need to be followed with bigger investment and more people coming in. That is the hope. Anna, and then Palvi and Karen, I'll come to you.
I just want to pick up on the DBS point, and I think this is where, for individuals like myself, we would always need, I think, to be able to not employ people on the register, and I think or not I mean, I will employ people who don't have a clear DBS check. I don't have a problem with that at all. It totally depends on what the thing is. But I'm not going to, I'll probably get it wrong, but Baroness Jane Campbell, who's been, you know, like at the head of the independent living movement for decades and is amazing. But, you know, she talks about how she employed one of her drivers who'd been in prison for armed robbery in the past, you know, and he worked for her for long time as one of her best ever drivers, you know, and actually I think I probably am looking for sometimes for quite different, I mean, I'm not looking for armed robbers, but I'm, you know, I'm as somebody, an individual, I suppose it's my right to choose who's in my home, and that potentially yeah, so I suppose I think I totally agree with you. I think just having something on a DBS is not necessarily shouldn't be you can't therefore be on a register forever. I suppose for me it very much is about values, and that's what I mean. I never ask for any qualification, MVQ or whatever, and actually because I just don't think it necessarily means that it teaches people the right things. And so I do think training, whatever training is, needs to be looked at and co-produced, and it needs to be in a way that brings people in, that does mean people can, that they come in with the right values. You know, I've been out with my PA like garden centres and cafes and things, and we've seen people in sort of carer uniforms clearly, you know, pushing somebody in a wheelchair and totally not, you know, the two carers are talking to each other, totally ignoring the person. And my PA gets so angry. Honestly, sometimes I think she's going to actually go over and like, you know, like, and I'm sort of holding her back, like, you know, don't really. And she gets that that's wrong, and she's had no training in social care, you know, and I think, so yeah, I really think it's very difficult in those sort of ongoing assessments and even reflective practice. Yeah, I've written reflective essays in the past. And, you know, we just wrote them because we knew what we had to say, and we knew we had to say certain words that got you past that essay. That's terrible, but it's the reality was, you know, and I want it to be a genuine thing, I suppose. My only other final point is picking up what you said, Karolina, about, you know, getting investment in the sector. And I suppose, unfortunately, I don't think just having a register in itself is going to mean that the government actually finally properly funds social care. I don't think, you know, I just don't think, you know, I think we've been trying for so many years to kind of get this investment, and it's clear that we need a much better investment in social care. And so I suppose from sort of Social Care Future's view, we're trying to currently scope out a massive, you know, a way of thinking, well, okay, how can we change society and the whole of like British society's view on what social care should be? How can we talk about people's lives in a different way, and how can we almost not reinvent social care, but actually make this about it being about all of our lives, and something that we want to invest in as a society. And then hopefully the political will, you know, the pressure is then politically there, and then hopefully the money will follow. And that's the long-term thing, and it's not an easy fix. But I, you know, I'd love to think that, and maybe I've just been too, maybe I'm just too, what's the word, pessimistic or whatever, but I just, unfortunately, I fear that with the current money as it is, like, we could spend a lot of money setting up a register, and actually there'll be no extra money. And that's not, I know that's not any of your fault, but I suppose that's one of my fears, actually, because the reality is at the minute it's very hard to get any money for social care from anywhere. And I think that's a bigger problem that we all need to work together on at the same time as talking about these things, because actually fundamentally that's a massive shift that has to happen regardless of registration. I think, you know, that just has to happen, because for everybody working in social care, drawing on social care, like, until that big shift happens, we're kind of trying to make a system that is just can't cope. We're trying to improve something with that half our hands tied behind our backs. Yeah, I'll stop.
No, no, no. I don't know if I make a funny face. I'm going to keep saying I'll stop. If it's my face, I apologize. No, no, no. No, I completely agree. Just the register won't bring enough funding, but it will be. It would hopefully be one of those bits that put a bit more pressure to get more funding in. And yes, we need a complete reframing of what social care is, reframing of the value of people who draw on social care, reframing of the value of the workers, and for the society to stop being angry at providers no matter what they do, because especially I think since COVID, it seems no matter what provider does, they close a care home. Oh, that's bad because people can't go and visit. They open a care home. Oh, that's bad because people are dying of COVID. It's never the right thing that providers do as well. And by extension, care workers, etc., etc. So we do need a different conversation about it. Karen, if it's okay, I'll go to Palvi and then I'll get to you.
Hi. Okay, so I can't comment on the PA side just because obviously I own care homes, but we don't do the PA side. But one thing is I'm very pro digitizing. So with that, there's a lot of data we have as care providers that I feel we could just use rather than putting the pressure on care workers to refill out more forms and stuff. So our organization is like trying to digitize our care plans, and everything is going online, and COVID has accelerated that. And I'm sure, because I know as well you do a lot of digital social care and stuff, there's a lot of data that can be recycled as a care provider that we don't need to put the pressure on the care worker to resubmit it. The other thing is, everyone knows we do a lot of paperwork for CQC. The paperwork is actually there. It's where you submit it. So if we can all get on the same bandwagon and go, I'm not going to put it here, but I'll put it there, and that's fine, that might end up helping because you're not just filling out the same form. The thing is, ultimately, I do need to get application forms from candidates when they apply. I won't just let someone walk in without them having filled in an application form. They will have done an application form. That information will be then sitting on a DBS as well. A lot of the information I need from that person, I got on day one. And I can use that information because actually as part of their background checks, my HR person's already getting their certificates and qualifications and stuff. So I do feel like we need to be creative and not just keep asking people for the same stuff that they've already submitted in different places. As a provider, I totally agree, we're always wrong. No matter what we do, we're always wrong and we need more funding. So let me just be clear, everyone needs more funding. But yeah, I think I see Anna's point of view and I completely get it, because what I, again, thought as a provider is, it doesn't mean you have to use this register. We just want to get this register to a point that you just know the quality is so good on this register that actually, if you're on that register and someone comes to me for an interview, I know already this person's been vetted and there's a certain amount of experience that I can already go, oh, okay, I can actually see you've done 3 years of care, you've done these qualifications, I don't need to do it. Great, you are actually able to start on Tuesday. Wouldn't that be really good without me having to go, probably 4 weeks from now, let's see how long it takes to get all your background checks done. Oh, wait, you mean your last employer is closed, so you can't get a reference. So now I have to do a risk assessment because although you claimed you worked at that care home, there's no evidence of it and all of that stuff. So I'm trying to find that you, as a provider, I want to use this register just to speed up recruitment, and I'm hoping it will improve retention, but I'm not using it, or it never even occurred to me to go, this is the be all and end all. If you're not on this register, for me, I would love it for it to be something to entice people and go, come join Serene Care, you'll become a care worker, we'll develop you, you'll join this register. Then, if you end up moving on, you won't need to redo the same training for the 50,000th time. Let's make sure that you're actually moving up, learning more skills and stuff like that. And that, I think it's more about upskilling people who actually want to stay in care, but also perhaps using it as a skill, as a way to make people be accountable for their actions as well. Because if they aren't a great care worker and they're just going from home A, B, C, D, that should also be highlighted as well. Because Anna, like I said, like you were just mentioning, you wouldn't stop people from coming in because they've not got a clear DBS, but also even in our case, if someone had a parking ticket 4 years ago and they've had penalties and it's all on their DBS, that's not a reason not to hire them in a care home. You would risk assess the situations. I guess it's on a case-by-case basis as well. But I think It's just knowing that you don't have to do all of that work every single time, which I think as a provider is pretty good. However, I recognize your point. If we spend all this money putting the register together, this very limited pot of money, we do need to find a solution to it. But that's why I was thinking, if you can recycle the information we already have on the candidates, that will also stop the pressure on the candidates as well, because I'm sitting there with staff files that I'm auditing all the time. So yes, there has to be time put into the system, and you can't say to me, oh, by next Tuesday, put 30 staff files on the system. But it could be something as part of your recruitment. You're already getting this information. Go put it in the database. Go put it straight in the database. You don't have to put it in 2 different places. And that database is the place I can put it for my recruitment background check. Maybe that's how you build your register.
Yeah, thank you very much, Palvi. Some great ideas there. Karen.
I guess the point I really want to make is about the ability of the regulator to be flexible and responsive and to adapt as time progresses. And that's what we've seen with the SSSC, and that's what they're about to undertake with this new review of the codes of practice. PAs are not currently registered in Scotland because actually when registration was set up, they didn't exist because that's what social care workers were. So there is this quite distinction between 2 levels, I suppose, of care workers within the system now. And there is a question there, which is actually, shouldn't PAs be afforded the same access to wellbeing support, the same access to training that you can get as a SSSC, Scottish Social Services Council registrant? Because, there are risks involved in carrying out that role. And equally, as an employer, where do you go, if things go wrong? So there are definite benefits to having the support of the registration body if they have shifted to carry out that role. Like I say, the SSSC adopted that wellbeing support role. They adopted that training and learning role as time progressed because they recognised that they couldn't just be there to serve the system. So it's about making a purposeful registration body, not just something that collects data. On the data point, I think it's really important though, because workforce planning is a huge issue, and we don't currently collect all the data that we need, but we do have some data because of registration, which helps us to plan for the future. So for instance, we now know that 75% of people in Scotland are employed in the same role that they were employed in 2020. Now that's really significant data to know, because we always talk about the transient nature of the population of the social care workforce. But actually in the pandemic, what we saw was a lot of people stayed where they were. So you can start to unpick and realise and really understand the reasons behind that. And put in and address support as and where required. So there's a huge role for registration and workforce planning and development, the learning development that sits alongside that. And I think that has certainly been an advantage that Scotland should use better and are adapting. So we will be shifting and collecting data in a different way, and some of that's tied into the National Care Service, but since that's not coming into effect since 2026, we really should be getting a wriggle on and starting to adapt. A couple of other points that came up is, I'll give an example of where the register has quite frankly been a pain in the backside. So I have a colleague who has a degree in social work and an MBA. Their parents ran a care at home service. They had gone off, worked in the business world, came back and wanted to take over that organisation and work with their parents, or basically their parents were like, right, time for us to retire, come on, come back, get in here. There's a business here for you to run. Well, they had to do their SVQ level 3, which effectively sits at a much lower entry level grade than their social work degree would have, or indeed their MBA, because they're managing the service. So there are questions there about, is registration asking for the right things from the right people? So that's absolutely something we've not nailed here in Scotland, but something which they're looking to do work on. Really interesting conversations as well about how do you capture the re-registration process. So we're certainly having conversations about people being able to submit using video, using snippets and videos of them carrying out work, you know, from day to day, rather than that, leaving it to the last possible minute. How can you use apps? How can you capture it as they're going along to make it part of your everyday life, rather than, you know, your everyday working life, rather than something you're going, oh God, it's due next week, I'm going to fall off the register. And then what happens? Because then I'm not registered for 2 weeks. So does my employer let me work until I get my re-registration and I'm back on? These are the things that really, really need unpicked as well. So how can we make it a much more fluid process, a continual process of assessment and registration, rather than one big deadline at which point everyone falls off? And, you know, if you're sick that week, then you're snookered. So there are definitely things that need unpicked, but we have the benefit of being that way further down. So please take learning from Scotland. And you don't have to make the mistakes that we have, you know. But one of the, as I say, the real benefits of the SSC is they're recognizing where things aren't working as well as they could, and going away and working with the sector, working, you know, with people who access care and support. They're working with the workforce to address these things. They're not just sitting in a room by themselves going, oh, this is a problem, I know, we'll do this to fix it. So that co-production piece is really, really important. And yeah, Palvi, that is what happens. So people can, you know, reapply, an employer can apply for that grace period for re-registration if someone has fallen off, but it really is discouraged, because otherwise it sort of makes a mockery of a deadline to a certain extent. So it is possible to apply, but it's not an easy process to a certain extent, because they don't really want to encourage it.
Thank you very much. And Anna, you mentioned in the comments a digital passport for care workers to hold the skills, which is something that's been discussed, it's been worked on in different ways. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Our time is up. Thank you for a great conversation. I think from me, first of all, recognition that quite obviously I was not an unbiased chair in this discussion, and I came in with very strong personal views, but I hope especially you, Anna, felt that you know, you could say what you wanted to say. And you know, we discussed both advantages, disadvantages, and potential barriers. We didn't have a chance to really mention or talk about, you know, a professional body for care workers, which in a way, you know, might be a separate discussion, but something that should potentially be considered. And I think I'd like to end on it that, as a former care worker myself, and many care workers that I've spoken to or seen talk about the issues online, I think one of the biggest problems that we're facing with the workforce is lack of sense of belonging. And I think Register or a professional body or both could in a way help address that. And I think it's much more difficult to stay working within a sector or doing a job, especially if, you know, pay isn't where it should be or support isn't where it should be, when you don't feel like you belong somewhere beyond your direct employer. And that's something that I think policymakers need to give a lot more thought to, because we need to be able for care workers to feel like they're part of something bigger, because they're part of this bigger thing that, you know, supports the lives of other people and hopefully, you know, helps them live the lives that they want to live. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you to those who are watching live or will be watching it once we put it out on YouTube, hopefully very soon. And please do join us for other sessions this week. There is another one in just 25 minutes. So there you go. Right. Have a lovely day and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.